Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 20th of August now. On this Wednesday, we always encourage you to stay up to date with the latest weather information from the National Weather Service in your part of Alaska and your village. You can easily do that online by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can listen to your NOAA weather radio. Call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find Weather Service information on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Of course, in the afternoon, you get your daily map briefing there around 4 o'clock. And if you go to AKWX TV in the search bar on YouTube, you can get this complete forecast online following the show in the evening hours. And also you can find that on our broadcast partners website at alaskapublic.org. A lot of ways to get the same information there. Here's what's going on. We're still tracking the elevated Kenai River there across the western Kenai Peninsula. The surge continues to work its way downstream, and we're seeing some improvements there below Ski Lac Lake, but flood advisory continues now through the end of the week there. So if you're along the Kenai River out toward the Cook Inlet, you want to keep watch on that and just make sure that if we do get some extra rain in the area, if a thunderstorm happens to blow up upstream, just watch for additional rises there and more information from the River Forecast Center. The Alaska weather headlines tonight include that flood advisory, again for the Kenai River. A small patch of ice up north remains near Prudhoe Bay. It's caught along some of the barrier islands. It is rotting in place, but again, it's probably giving a few people just one of those late summer headaches there. It just won't go away. Showers and storms focus on the interior and the mountains for the next couple days. And if you look at southeast, that bright, shining ball of gas in the sky, that'll be the sun. That should be there through Thursday and Friday, so enjoy that while it lasts. Now, as far as fire danger goes across most of Alaska, things have been pretty tame lately. That's good news as we've gotten into the wetter part of the season. We'll continue to see improvements, obviously, but we still have a few dry patches out there. One of those just around Northway and north of the Alaska Range, close to the Alcan border. It's in the high category, but that's about it. The rest of the state so far out of the fire danger mode at the moment. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. A couple things to key on. A lot of sunshine and clear, dry air across southeast. That's allowed temperatures to close in on the 80-degree mark in some places in the Panhandle earlier today. South Central also saw a wealth of sunshine. A little bit further north, though, not the case. A lot of the warmer air and the unstable air with low pressure in the area has allowed that wetter and warmer air to bubble up, and those towers have turned into showers and a few thunderstorm clouds out there. A little bit further west, a little bit of a different colored horse, if you will, out around Adak. Low pressure slowly working its way into the Bering Sea, very slowly. In fact, so slowly, it's just going to fall apart as it spins up on itself. The changes in the air mass between what you see between Sand Point and Shemya and Anadir and southward all get stirred up together. So there's really not much of a front left by the time we get into Friday and Saturday. There will still be a weak wave of low pressure, it looks like, that's working its way into the north and western Gulf of Alaska, but it's days away and a lot of things can change between now and then. In the meantime, high pressures up across the Arctic coast. That should keep winds pretty light across the Beaufort Seacoast. It's also making for a wealth of fog, and you can see that on the visible satellite picture here. That very low flat color across the Arctic coast is fog and stratus, and we see a lot of that across the Bering Sea as well. But notice that high pressure is also chipping away at that north from Sand Point and east of St. Paul and southwest of Bethel. Around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, we saw fog reported there for a good part of today. Out across the central and eastern Gulf, you can see a little bit of a spiral banding shape here. That's another wave of low pressure. High pressure is keeping that well to the south of most of the land. And again, that rougher texture that you see across the visible satellite picture here across the interior, the lower and middle Yukon and the upper Kuskokwim Valley, that is that bubbling clouds shape that we see on the satellite picture, those towering cumulus clouds, of course, can turn into thunderstorms, and we saw a few of those a little bit closer to the Seward Peninsula and the Yukon Valley, as well as the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range earlier today, and just a few of those bubbling up around south central at this hour. As we look at the weather map there, we've got a weak disturbance sitting up across the Brooks Range. The main focus of its efforts right now seem to be in the shower and thunderstorm production just along the Yukon Valley and south. High pressure up north has even allowed a few showers into the coastal plain, one of those near Barrow earlier today. Low pressure west of Haida Gwaii at 1,010 millibars is what we saw in that spiral shape there in the satellite picture there. And just outside of Kodiak Island and south of the Kenai Peninsula, a small pocket of rain, not much to look at all. High pressure still in charge of the west coast, and there's our weak disturbance out across the western Aleutians that as we watch that slowly trek eastward, it will gradually spin up on itself as we were talking about a minute ago. A few showers tonight across the Talkeetnas and perhaps across the Alaska Range, the upper Yukon Valley, as well as parts of Kotzebue Sound. High pressure is also sitting across the YK Delta there at 1,024 millibars. That should lock in some fog again all the way from the Bering Strait down to the Alaska Peninsula and the Bering Sea coast. As we go ahead into tonight, the frontal boundary located north and east of low pressure across the western chain will gradually fall apart. We also notice a little bit of warmer, wetter air sneaking its way into the western part of the Gulf. High pressure still in charge there at 1,025 millibars, but it is acting as a moisture conveyor belt, moving that northward slowly and surely. But right now, we still have an axis of high pressure that's extending just south of the Alaskan Peninsula. So this is kind of acting like a wall right here, just kind of holding it back, kind of like your little brother there putting a hand on his head going, no, no, not yet. Out across the upper Yukon Valley, a few showers and storms there on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Southeast is still clear. Enjoy your sunshine again tomorrow, and mostly for Thursday and Friday as well. For coastal areas there, a little more cloud cover starts to sneak in as high pressure shifts around a little bit. And the little brother finally gets in across the central Gulf at 1,017 millibars. It's going to sneak underneath, kind of making it run through the legs there. Low pressure across the central and western chain is now turned into just a trough of low pressure. That wave is sneaking eastward a little bit more. And we'll get more of a southeasterly flow coming up through the central and eastern Aleutians. Out across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, a few showers, more fog along the coast and into the Norton Sound region. Showers up around Kotzebue and probably the middle Tanana Valley. Thunderstorms should be nearby, if not passing through town, perhaps Friday afternoon. A lot of that will be centered up a little bit closer to the Alcan border with high pressure just outside of Prince William Sound. Looks like seas will be pretty flat heading into the weekend. Temperatures today were, well, not quite blistering, but certainly warmer than they've been across southeast. Some areas closing in on 80 degrees, including places closer to Angoon and Haines earlier today. The temperatures by 4 o'clock had cooled down a little bit into the 50s and 60s. Hyder still showing 72. Sitka was closer to 65. Prince William Sound in the 50s and 60s today. Pleasant Day in Valdez at 63. Homer and Seward in the 50s and 60s. Kenai 54, 61 in Anchorage. Talkeetna was 63. The Valley also pleasantly mild in the lower 60s. 67 around Glen Allen. 66 in Fairbanks. About the same there for Northway and Eagle this afternoon. Fort Yukon was 64. Ambler and Bettles in the upper 50s to lower 60s. Tanana 57. The Arctic coast was in the 40s and 50s. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse at 48. 47 around Barrow. 50 in Atkasuk. Around Point Lay and Point Hope, temps were closer to 50 degrees. Kotzebue was showing 59, 56 in Kivalina, Shishmaref 55, Nome in the mid-50s as well. Unalakleet, upper 50s this afternoon, 61 in Grayling. McGrath was 63. Galena, a mild 54 degrees. With Bethel, a little bit on the cooler side of what you'd expect, 61. Nunivak Island at 55. St. Lawrence Island also in the mid-50s. With the Pribilofs a little bit cooler than yesterday at St. Paul anyway. 54 there, 57 in St. George. Lower 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 61. Cold Bay and False Pass in the lower 60s. With Dutch Harbor, Unalaska in the upper 50s. Adak was 55. Atka 54. And about the same out there at Shemya. Overnight low temperatures will drop into the mid to upper 40s for a good part of the interior tonight. Look for 34 in Eagle. Well, might see a little frost on the rooftop with that. Upper 40s and lower 50s across southeast. Upper 40s for Prince William Sound. Lower 50s for most of the Kenai Peninsula and 50 in Kodiak. Closer to 50 for the Chain and a good chunk of the Alaska Peninsula, with Nome looking at 45 and Barrow at 38. High temperatures tomorrow in Barrow, probably 45. Not a bad day at all. 55 in Nome. Southwest looking at temperatures in the mid-60s. Most of the interior will get close to that 70-degree mark, if not passing it, around Northway and Eagle again. South Central, mid to upper 60s. Another fine day in Southeast. Looks like lower 70s for you. So again, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the heat. 63 in Kodiak tomorrow. Flying weather, we expect MVFR conditions around the Beaufort Seacoast, especially in the western part of the Beaufort into the Chukchi Seacoast, and then IFR conditions just to the west in the Bering Strait and also across the western Bering Sea and through the central and western chain. Otherwise, MVFR conditions for patchy areas in the Gulf, and just about everything else should be clear and dry. IFR conditions turning MVFR for Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass. We'll watch for thunderstorms in the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should both see improvements during the day after a little bit of a low deck start. Rainy Pass probably looking at some fog and low clouds in the morning, and then VFR through the rest of the day. Same goes for Windy Pass. We expect improvements. Isabel Pass should see VFR by the end of the afternoon. Mentasta Pass looking at visual flight rule through your Thursday, and Tanita Pass also expecting VFR by late in the day. Porter's Pass looks great with high pressure and control, and Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see clear blue sky there, so enjoy that. Freezing levels, we still show our cold pocket around the Bering Strait, around Nunivak Island, and just to the west around St. Lawrence Island. That's as low as maybe a little bit below 6,000 feet. A little bit of warmer air ridging up here across the Yukon, the northern Gulf Coast, and southeastern Alaska between about 10 and 12,000 feet at its maximum. And there is some cooler air building out across the eastern side of Siberia, around 6,000 to 8,000 feet. So you can see some colder air trying to set up, but it's got a lot to do to get all the way into Alaska at this point. Icing potential is pretty limited. It's been like this for days. Above 8,000 feet, we might see a little bit of light to isolated moderate south of Sand Point. This is all wrapping around that wave of low pressure that's really not working its way northward, so no major concerns that this is going to swing northward very quickly tomorrow at all. Out across the western chain, around that frontal boundary again, above 8,000 feet, you might find some light icing potential, mainly rime, and above 8,000 feet around the Brooks Range, should be pretty limited. Probably more of a concern will be the convection firing up, especially with the thunderstorms in the region of the middle and upper Yukon Valley and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Our jet stream still shows that predominant trough across the western Bering Sea and eastern sections of Asia. We've got a ridge of high pressure across the Gulf. That's guiding in that southwesterly flow to the Gulf, but right now, without a whole lot of surface disturbances making it through, the risk of widespread rain and frontal passages just isn't with us at this point. We've got a little bit of that fast-moving jet coming across the Seward Peninsula, and that is helping to stir up the convection, just like we talked about yesterday. It gives that a little added oomph to any showers and storms that even start growing on their own. That jet streak starts to help things moving a little bit better. A southerly flow across the west really lightens up as it moves into the interior, about 5 to 15 knots or so. The main focus for any circulations out there across the western chain, and even the winds under that are fairly light, only 20 to 25 knots. A north and westerly flow coming through southeast, even lighter at 3,000 feet with high pressure and command of the Gulf of Alaska. You'll notice south and westerly flow coming across Norton Sound and the Brooks Range, still 5 to 10 knots, and working up through the Bering Strait, about 10 to 15 knots or so. Low pressure has a pretty loose command out across the western Bering Sea. So turbulence really isn't a huge issue there. You'll notice, well, we've gone to black. If you can still hear me, low pressure is still adding a little bit of turbulence out across the west, but we expect that to be light to isolated moderate at best.
In Valdez, all the waves were locally generated. Tremendous land movement during the quake initially caused the water to literally stand up and collapse into town. Then, 93 million cubic yards of glacial deposits under the dock area slumped and generated a 30 to 40-foot wave. Freddie Christopherson, then 13, described what he saw.
Danny Peaks and I went down on the dock to see the boat and load, and then we were leaving. Earthquake started, and then Danny and I ran. I looked back and I saw the boat go up. Then it took off, and then I saw the dock go up, and then we kept running up to Stiff's Motors. I got a ride with some guy in a pan. We went out to 6 Mile Hill. We waited for a while, then we went back in.
4 decades later, that memory remains burned into Fred Christopherson's soul.
It was the biggest, blackest wave that I had ever seen. I was turning around watching it with my little buddy hollering at me up the road here, "Run, run, don't look, run."
I looked back and I saw the ship. It was about 30 feet out of the water, and the stern was in the air, and the bow was pointing right down into the water, and I could see the prop slowly turning and water coming off of it.
Great big crevasse opened up, and I didn't know if I was going to make it.
The longshoremen and the visitors that were on the dock running this way, trying to get to the shore, and it broke away from the shore, and they ran this way to go to the boat to look for some protection, and there just wasn't any protection. They just, finally the dock all busted up and they all disappeared, never to be seen again.
They were gone in just a moment.
I just couldn't imagine the people that were on the dock and what they, the last minutes of their lives and how they must have suffered knowing what was going to happen.
A short time later, at the far end of Port Valdez, the Chute Bay glacial moraine above and below the waterline avalanched and collapsed into the bay. It generated a 220-foot wave. It was the tallest wave recorded anywhere during the '64 quake. Delbert Ferrier and his father were in a skiff a short distance away when the monster passed by.
That's when I saw it wipe out, take all the concrete off the light, wipe that out, and go over the top of that little island and go in front of us, and it was starting to break on top. So, but we were just getting the big rollers. We were going up and down, you know, not knowing what the hell was going to happen. And that just missed us. We got more of the roller part. Had we been back there, well, you know, it'd been gone.
By the time this wave reached Valdez, it was still 40 feet high, but it did the greatest damage to the town. In the years following the disaster, Valdez was rebuilt on more solid ground about 3 miles away. Tsunamis are created by the sudden displacement of water, usually caused by very powerful earthquakes that violently change the elevation of the seafloor. Tsunamis also can be caused by above or underwater landslides, which are often generated by earthquakes. Though far less likely, tsunamis may also be caused by the eruption of submarine volcanoes, meteor impacts, or nuclear explosions. When a tsunami is generated in the open ocean, the water is so deep that the wave is barely detectable, maybe no more than a foot high at the surface. But it can travel across the ocean at jetliner speeds of 500 to 600 miles per hour. As that same wave reaches shallower water, it will slow down to about 1/10 of the speed and may grow more than 10 times in height. If the lower part of the wave reaches shore first, the incoming surge may actually be preceded by water flowing out to sea, exposing the ocean bottom or emptying channels and even huge bays. Most think that a tsunami appears as an enormous cresting wave, but in fact, most tsunamis come in as a fast-moving surge of water, like a monster high tide in fast motion. In addition to the 1964 tsunamis, 2 other tsunami events in Alaska stand out. In 1958, the highest tsunami recorded in modern history occurred in Lituya Bay in southeast Alaska. An earthquake dislodged a huge chunk of a mountain, which crashed into the bay. The impact created a wave that splashed 1,700 feet up a mountainside, completely denuding a slope of all trees and soil. One fisherman was killed when the wave swept his boat out to sea. In 1946, a strong earthquake in the Aleutian Islands that probably generated an underwater landslide created a huge tsunami that wiped out the Scotch-Cap Lighthouse, perched 40 feet above sea level. 5 people were killed. This same wave traveled silently and undetected across the Pacific Ocean to the Hawaiian Islands, where it killed another 159 unsuspecting people. It was this disaster that led to the formation of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center.
The U.S. National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program is the educational program in which communities are advised that they in fact live in an area in which tsunamis might be expected sometime in the future to attack, and to educate the population that in fact there may not be much warning time.
And this particular program is a partnership between three agencies, U.S. Geological Survey, seismologist expertise, NOAA, which is oceanographic expertise, and FEMA, which is mitigation expertise. So those are the three partners that are working on the federal side. On the state side is the 5 states affected. That's Alaska and Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and California.
Here at UEF, at the Geophysical Institute, we are involved in 3 of the aspects of this national program. Those consist of warning, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. The warning aspect that we participate in, it uses seismology.
At the Geophysical Institute, scientists monitor earthquake data from several hundred seismic sensing stations across Alaska. When a seismic disturbance occurs, this data is instantly transmitted to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska. Scientists on 24-hour call quickly analyze that data, along with data from their own network of sensors, and decide whether or not they should issue a tsunami warning.
When we see a large earthquake has occurred and it's occurred near the coast, we'll issue a warning to those who could be affected by the wave within a certain amount of time. And then we'll monitor the wave to see if it really was dangerous or not, and if it was dangerous, then we'll expand the warning to all the people that it may be dangerous for.
Now, as we move our attention up to the Beaufort Sea coast, less than 30 nautical miles of rotting sea ice is sitting just to the north and east of Prudhoe Bay along some of the shoals and barrier islands there. That continues to rot in place, but the process is slow, so if you're finding ice out there just northeast of Prudhoe Bay, that is it. Otherwise, most of the area is sea ice free. You can see the sea ice edge well to the north of east of Kaktovik and Prudhoe Bay itself. Here's a look at the forecast now for southeastern Alaska for tomorrow. Still looking at northerly winds coming down through the inner waterways, 10 to 15 knots in most areas. Into the Clarence Strait, that could be as high as 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Coastal areas looking at mostly a northwesterly flow, a little bit more west than north as you get up toward Yakutat. Otherwise, winds around 20 knots with a 4 to 5-foot sea on Thursday. That diminishes as we get into Friday, more of an onshore flow in the north. Still looking at that parallel flow from the northwest. A little bit further south, a 15-knot wind with 5-foot seas expected there in the inner waterways. Winds around 10 to 15 knots for the Stevens Passage, Frederick Sound area. More of a stronger northerly flow in the Lynn Canal, up to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, and westerlies continue around Yakutat. Around south central, winds should be pretty light in the Cook Inlet area, around Shelikof Strait, and inside Prince William Sound, about 10 to 15 knots at most. Most areas will be looking at a variable flow throughout the day as high pressure is in charge. A 2-foot sea inside Cook Inlet, 3-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, and south and westerly winds expected across the north and western Gulf, with a variable wind inside of Prince William Sound becoming a little more southerly as we get into Friday, but still light in all areas, as much as 10 knots with a variable flow on either side of Kodiak Island, 5-foot seas in the east, 3-foot seas in the north and western Gulf, 2-foot seas in the inside of Prince William Sound, and 2 to 3-foot seas in Cook Inlet and down to the west of the Barrens. As we look at the Alaska Peninsula now, winds are also light in this region, a south and southeasterly flow on the Pacific side, a variable flow inside of Bristol Bay with a 1-foot sea, 4 to 5-foot seas in the Pacific. As we check on Friday, then southeasterly winds will pick up a little bit more steadily from about 15 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas in the Bering, and 5 to 6-foot seas in the Pacific side as we wrap up the week. For south and easterly flow across the Aleutians, expected about 15 to 20 knots or so, maybe as high as 25 knots south of Adak and Atkin. That's going to drive 8-foot seas there as we get into Thursday. A south and easterly flow for the west and west central parts of the chain, 15 to 20 knots with 5 to 6-foot seas. As we get into Friday, more of a southerly flow coming into Nikolsky and Unalaska. From the Pacific side, that should generate about 6-foot seas there. Southeasterlies bend a little bit more. with 4-foot seas in the Bering and an easterly flow across Kiska, with northerlies developing around Shemi and Attu with a 5-foot sea by Friday. Across the west coast, light and variable winds north of Nunivak Island, southwesterlies coming over St. Lawrence Island with a 3-foot sea, and southeasterlies around the Pribilofs with a 3-foot sea there. Otherwise, light winds closer to the coast. Those become a little more south and easterly with time by Friday, about 10 to 15 knots on either side of Nunivak Island, and in the Kuskokwim Delta, it could be about 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Otherwise, northeasterlies now start to move out of Norton Sound at 15 knots, crossing St. Lawrence Island and moving into the St. Matthew Island waters. For the Arctic coast, a south and southwesterly flow outside of Kotzebue Sound and up toward Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. About 20 knots should be expected off of Wainwright. 4-foot seas are expected for Thursday. A light easterly flow continues around the Beaufort Sea, about 10 to 15 knots there with a 2 to 3-foot sea expected for Friday. More of an onshore flow with 2-foot seas and 10-knot winds. Light southerly flow leaving Barrow at 10 knots, and south and westerly winds continue to make its way through the Bering Strait and up the Chukchi Seacoast at about 15 to 25 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, once again, a flood advisory continues for the western Kenai Peninsula along the Kenai River with elevated river levels there. We're not expecting a whole lot of rain in the next 24 hours, but if something were to develop over the Kenai Mountains and move downstream, that could bring the water levels up a little bit more. A flood advisory continues through the end of the week. Showers are expected across the interior, mainly along the mountains there and across the west coast into the south-facing slopes of the western Brooks Range as a weak area of low pressure sits across the Brooks Range summits. Fog in the north and low pressure in the west. As that moves eastward slowly, it will gradually fall apart. Another surge of some rain and some warmer weather trying to work into the western Gulf. Sunshine for southeast tomorrow. Should be a wonderful day. And spotty showers for south central and parts of the Copper River Basin, mainly the higher terrain, with a better focus for showers and storms in the north and northeastern interior along the Alcan, heading for Friday with showers developing around Bristol Bay and across the central and eastern Aleutians. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.